The next time you are on the London Underground, sitting in a rattling carriage in the dark, half watching your own reflection in the black glass, do something for me. Look out of the window, not at the platforms where you stop, but at the tunnel walls rushing past in between. Because every so often, if you know when to look, the darkness opens up. For a second or two, your train tears through a space that is wider than a tunnel has any right to be. You catch a flash of tiling, an old advertisement, 90 years out of date, the pale edge of a platform where no train has stopped in living memory, and then it is gone, and you are back in the black, and the man opposite you has not even looked up from his phone. What you just passed was a ghost, a dead station, sealed and abandoned, buried alive inside the living railway, and it is not alone. Beneath the streets of London, hidden in the gaps between the stations you know, there is an entire secret city, closed platforms, bricked-up staircases, lift shafts that go nowhere, tunnels that simply stop. Some of them have been dark for over 100 years. Some of them hid the nation's greatest treasures during the war. One of them hid the Prime Minister himself while the bombs fell on the city above. This is the story of the London that London forgot, the stations that died and why, the secrets they were made to keep, and the strange, silent, frozen world that is still down there right now, a few feet below the feet of millions of people who have absolutely no idea it exists. Once you know it is there, you will never ride the underground the same way again. To understand how a great city ends up with dead railway stations hidden inside it, you have to understand how the London Underground was actually built, because it was not built, not as one thing, by one plan, by one hand. It grew, wildly, competitively, chaotically, like a city of its own. In the late Victorian age and the early years of the 20th century, London was the largest city on earth, and it was strangling on its own success. The streets were choked, and into that desperate need for movement rushed not a single wise authority, but a scramble of rival private companies, each one digging its own tunnels, building its own lines, racing to carry the crowds and take their pennies. They built where they thought the money was. They put stations wherever they could buy the land. And they were, every one of them, gambling. And when you gamble, sometimes you lose. Some of these stations were built in the wrong place. Some were built too close to the station down the line, so that trains had barely picked up speed before they had to stop again. Some served streets that never grew as fast as the company had hoped. Some were simply never busy enough to justify the cost of keeping them lit and staffed and running. A station is not a monument, it is a business. And a station where too few people get on and off is a business that is quietly losing money every single day in the most expensive real estate in the world. So they closed them, not with ceremony, usually with nothing at all. One evening, the last passenger would leave, the gates would be locked, and that would be that. The trains kept running, they still run today, but they stopped stopping. They just rushed straight through, and gradually the city above forgot there had ever been a way down. The entrances were sold, or bricked up, or turned into shops, and the platforms below were left exactly as they were, in the dark, waiting for passengers who were never going to come. That is how you make a ghost station. You do not build it, you abandon it, and you let the darkness do the rest. Let me take you to some of them, because each one has a story, and some of those stories are very strange indeed. Start with the very first. Deep beneath the City of London, near the northern end of London Bridge, there is a station called King William Street. It has the melancholy honor of being the first deep-level tube terminus in the world. The northern end of the very first proper deep tube railway ever built, opened in 1890. It was a genuine wonder of the age. Electric trains running in a cast-iron tube far below the streets, and it was a disaster. The station had been dug in an awkward, cramped position, on a curve, at the wrong gradient, and the tunnels leading to it were too tight for the traffic. Within just 10 years, the railway gave up, closed King William Street completely, and built a whole new route that bypassed it entirely. It has now been sealed and silent for well over a century, and it is still down there. The platform, the tunnel, the ghostly space where the age of the tube began, abandoned within a decade of the moment it made history. In the Second World War, it was pressed into use as an air raid shelter, and the old advertising posters on its walls were painted over with cheerful wartime murals to comfort the frightened people sheltering below. Those murals are still there, in the dark, seen by almost no one. A message of hope painted on the wall of the oldest ghost on the network. Then there is British Museum Station. It sat, as the name suggests, close to the museum itself, and it closed in the 1930s when a bigger, better-placed station opened nearby and made it redundant. But British Museum earned a strange afterlife. a legend grew up, helped along by a newspaper competition, and, later, a horror film, that the station was haunted by the ghost of an ancient Egyptian, that screams could be heard from the sealed platforms at night. None of it was true, of course, but the fact that the story took hold so easily tells you something about how these places sit in the imagination. A dead station, sealed beneath a museum full of mummies, in the dark. The human mind cannot help but fill that silence with something. And there is South Kentish Town, which closed in the 1920s, and which the poet John Betjeman turned into a small masterpiece of a story. A tale of an ordinary man who, lost in thought, accidentally steps off a train at the closed station and finds himself trapped, alone, in the dark, on a platform where no train will ever stop again. It is a made-up story, but it captures the precise, particular horror of these places perfectly. The Underground is the most crowded place in London, and a ghost station is that same place, that same tunnel, that same tiled platform, with every single human being removed, and the trains roaring past without so much as slowing down. You could stand there and scream, and the crowds would be flying past you in the dark, a few feet away, and never know. And those are only the famous ones. Once you start looking, the hidden city is everywhere. There is a station called Brompton Road, in a fashionable part of West London, which closed in the 1930s for the usual reason: too close to its neighbors, never busy enough. But it found a secret second life in wartime. Its deep, strong tunnels were taken over by the military and turned into a command center for the anti-aircraft defense of London, the very nerve center from which the guns that fired at enemy bombers were directed. Beneath the smart shops and townhouses of Knightsbridge, in a dead tube station, officers plotted the defense of the city's skies. There is York Road, in the north, near King's Cross, which closed in the 30s and still stands, its distinctive dark red-tiled entrance building visible at street level to this day. A genuine, complete Edwardian tube station front, standing on an ordinary road, with no station behind it anymore, just a sealed doorway and a stairway down into the dark. Thousands of people walk past it every week, and almost none of them realize they are looking at a ghost. There is City Road, and Mark Lane, and South Acton, and a dozen more, each one a small, closed chapter, sealed and forgotten, scattered across the map of the living railway. And then there is the strangest of all, a station that is a ghost, and yet was never even born. Deep beneath the wild heathland of Hampstead, in North London, there is a station that was dug and built and made ready. Platforms, tunnels, the deepest point on the whole network, and then never opened, not once. The area above it was protected parkland, and the houses that were supposed to fill up around it were never built, so there were never going to be enough passengers, and the station was simply sealed up before a single member of the public ever set foot in it. It has sat down there ever since, in the deepest darkness on the entire Underground, a perfect, unused, brand new station, over a century old, that has never known a passenger and never will. It is not a station that died. It is a station that was buried before it could ever live. But the greatest of all the London ghost stations is one you may actually have seen without knowing it, because it has become a film star. Its name is Aldwych. It sat at the end of a short, strange little branch line, a stub of railway that ran just one stop, from Holborn down to Aldwych and back, like a tiny shuttle to nowhere in particular. It was never busy. It was one of those Victorian gambles that never quite paid off. For decades, it limped along on a skeleton service, one of the least used stations on the whole network, until it finally closed for good in 1994. But Aldwych has a secret history, and it is a remarkable one, because a quiet, disused station, sealed off from the public but still connected to the network, turns out to be one of the most useful spaces in London. During both World Wars, when German bombs threatened to destroy the priceless collections of the city's museums, Aldwich's disused tunnels became a vault. In the First World War, treasures from the British Museum were hidden down there in the dark, safe beneath the earth. And in the Second World War, it happened again. Some of the most precious objects in the country, reportedly including the Elgin Marbles, those ancient sculptures from the Parthenon in Athens, were walled up inside a sealed London tube station, while the Blitz raged overhead. 2,000-year-old masterpieces of Greek art, sheltering in a dead railway station, waiting for the war to end. And in peacetime, Aldwych found yet another life, because it is a perfectly preserved, genuine, and completely controllable piece of the London Underground. Filmmakers adore it. Whenever you have seen a scene set in a tube station in a film, a chase, a horror sequence, a period drama with old-fashioned trains, there is a very good chance you were looking at Aldwych, dressed up to be somewhere else. They can flood it, fill it with smoke, shut it for a week, and no commuter is ever inconvenienced, because no commuter has set foot in it as a passenger for 30 years. The dead station earns its keep, quietly, as the stand-in for every station in London. Now, if a dead station is useful enough to hide the Elgin Marbles, you can imagine what else the government might do with one. And this is where the story of hidden London stops being merely eerie and becomes genuinely secret. Let me take you to a station called Down Street. It was a small, quiet station in one of the wealthiest parts of the city, in Mayfair, and like so many others, it was simply too close to its neighbors and never busy enough. It closed in the early 1930s, and by rights it should have become just another sealed and forgotten ghost. Instead, it became one of the most important secret rooms of the entire Second World War. Because when the war came and the bombs began to fall on London, the men who ran Britain's railways needed a bomb-proof place to work from. The railways were the arteries of the whole war effort, moving troops and weapons and food, and their headquarters could not be allowed to be blown up. So they took the disused, deep, and immensely strong tunnels of Down Street Station, and they secretly converted them into a fortified underground bunker, offices, meeting rooms, even bathrooms and a small kitchen, all buried far below the streets, safe from the heaviest bombs the enemy could drop. And in the darkest days of the Blitz, before his own famous war rooms were ready, the man who came down into that converted ghost station to shelter and to sleep and to work through the nights of bombing was the Prime Minister himself, Winston Churchill, the leader of the nation, directing the war, in a bricked-up, blacked-out, abandoned tube station in Mayfair, while above him the city burned. Trains full of ordinary Londoners rushed past in the dark, just feet away, not slowing, never stopping, with no idea that behind that wall of soot and brick sat the beating heart of the British war effort and the most wanted man in Europe. That is the thing about these places that is so hard to hold in your head. They are not remote, they are not far away. Down Street is right there, on the Piccadilly line, and the trains still thunder past its dark platform every few minutes, packed with commuters. It is not hidden by distance, it is hidden by speed, and by darkness, and by the simple fact that nobody thinks to look. The most extraordinary secrets in London were not kept in some far-off fortress. They were kept a few inches beyond the tunnel wall, in plain sight, in the dark, and the whole city rushed past them every single day. And then there is my favorite of all the secret railways beneath London, because this one was never meant for people at all. For most of the 20th century, London had a second, entirely separate underground railway, running deep beneath the streets, in its own tunnels, on its own tracks. It had trains, it had stations, it had platforms and signals and a control room, but no passenger ever rode it, because it was not built to carry people. It was built to carry letters. It was called the Mail Rail, properly the Post Office Railway, and it is one of the most wonderful and least known things ever built under a city. From the 1920s onwards, London's post office had a problem. The streets above were so jammed with traffic that vans full of mail could barely crawl across the city. So the post office built its own private tube, deep underground, running in a straight line beneath the congestion, connecting the great sorting offices and railway stations of the capital. Small, driverless electric trains ran through the darkness day and night, at speed, carrying bags of letters and parcels from one end of London to the other, sliding beneath the traffic jams as though they did not exist. For over 70 years it ran, silently, invisibly, moving millions of letters a day beneath the feet of people who never knew it was there. It finally closed in the early 2000s, when it became cheaper to move the mail by road again, and for years it too sat silent and abandoned, another ghost added to the buried city. But this one got a happier ending than most, because part of the old mail rail has now been reopened, not for letters, but for visitors. A stretch of those tiny tunnels has been turned into a ride, part of a museum, and now, for the first time in the railway's entire history, actual human beings can climb into little carriages and travel through the same dark tunnels that once carried nothing but the post. The secret railway that was never meant for people is now, at last, carrying them. It only took 100 years. And there is one more lost railway connected to London that is stranger and more haunting than any ghost station, because it was built, from the very beginning, to serve the dead. In the Victorian age, London had a terrible problem. It was running out of room to bury people. The city's graveyards were so dangerously overcrowded that a grim solution was devised. A vast new cemetery would be built far outside the city, in the countryside, big enough to hold the capital's dead for generations, and a special railway would carry them there. It was called the London Necropolis Railway, and from a private station of its own, near Waterloo, it ran funeral trains, whole trains of the dead, coffins loaded into special carriages, with the grieving families riding along behind in mourning coaches, out of the city and down to the great cemetery, to lay their loved ones to rest and then ride the same train home again. For decades, that is how a great many Londoners made their final journey, not in a hearse, but by train, on a scheduled service run purely for the dead and those who mourned them. The trains were even divided by class and by religion, the living and the dead alike sorted into different carriages according to their station in life, all the way to the grave. The private funeral station near Waterloo was badly damaged by bombing in the Second World War, and the strange, somber service never really recovered and was closed for good. But a fragment of that station's ornate entrance still stands on a London street today, a doorway that once led to the platforms where the coffins were loaded, and almost everyone who walks past it has no idea that it was once the gateway to a railway for the dead. So how much of this hidden city is still down there? The honest answer is, more than any one person fully knows. There are the dead stations, and others besides. There are the deep wartime shelters, some still used, some sealed. There are stretches of tunnel that were dug and then abandoned when plans changed, that simply end in a wall of London clay. And there are the secret government tunnels, built during and after the war and expanded through the Cold War, some so secret that their existence was denied for decades. Buried complexes with their own generators and water, built to outlive the end of the world. The truth, in the end, is stranger and better than the legends. A prime minister sheltering in a dead station while his city burned. The treasures of ancient Greece walled up in a disused tunnel. A driverless railway carrying letters through the dark for 70 years. The very first tube station in the world, sealed and silent for over a century, its wartime murals still bright on the walls, seen by no one. We tend to imagine that a city is what we can see. The streets, the buildings, the crowds, the surface, the part that is lit and busy and alive. But a city as old and as deep as London is not only what is on top, it is everything it has ever been, stacked up and layered down, and most of that history does not get demolished. It just gets closed and sealed and left. Every generation builds its railways and its shelters and its secret rooms, and uses them and moves on, and the tunnels stay. They do not go anywhere. They simply wait, in the dark, holding the shape of the moment they were abandoned, while the living city roars on, oblivious, a few feet above. So the next time you are down there, pressed into a crowded carriage, staring at nothing, counting the stops, remember what you are traveling through. You are not just riding a train. You are moving through the top, living layer of a buried world. And in the gaps between your stations, in the dark you never look at, there are platforms where no one waits, and staircases that lead nowhere, and rooms that once held prime ministers, and priceless art, and 70 years of other people's letters. They are all still there, right now. A city beneath the city, silent and complete and forgotten. And every day, millions of people rush straight past it in the dark and never, ever look out of the window. This has been Forgotten Railways. If you have ever glimpsed one of these ghosts from a passing train, tell us where in the comments. We love hearing them. And subscribe so that the hidden stations beneath our feet are never quite forgotten. We will see you down the line.